Good morning, Alex. Welcome to the meeting podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning or good afternoon for you.
Yeah, good afternoon here in Australia, but obviously the day's just started for you in Berlin.
It is. It started with a good cup of coffee, and now it continues with a good conversation.
I think we will, And so tell me, how's the week been treating you?
Pretty well, I must say. Especially this week, our new nanny has started, and it means that right now the week, obviously for the kids, it's a little bit of a change because suddenly there's a new person who they have to deal with, but that allows both my wife and I, who both work full time, to spend a little bit more dedicated time on work and then on family. And it's not just balancing both at the same time. So that is a relief for both of us. And relief is always good throughout the week, right?
It is. And if you could pinpoint what was the sole catalyst that made you guys go, you know what, we need a natty? Was there one thing, or was it more of a collection of things that go, you know what, we need this?
Interesting question. So look, my wife and I, we both work full time, and we love our jobs because it's something to do. We enjoy it, and so when we had our first kid, who's 3.5 now, and we got off parental leave, which in Germany is pretty nice, and we can talk about it later. We got off parental leave and we're like, okay, good. We both have, full-time jobs. How will we manage that throughout the week? And we said, look, let's try and get a nanny, because we didn't want to put our then 8-month-old son directly into kindergarten or something like this. And we thought, we have the opportunity, so let's try it. And it worked out pretty well, because it's basically help at home. We can focus for 7-8 hours, maybe 6 throughout the day, and then you come back and you have your mind free for family. And that's when it worked out well for the first part. And we went on parental leave again for our second kid. She is 1 year now, and then we got back from parental leave and said, let's do it again. We had a little bit of a trouble finding a nanny for kind of the second attempt, because ultimately you don't want to give to just anyone who comes around, right? And it's probably been the hardest interview process and decision-making process on whom to hire that I've ever had. And I hired a lot of people throughout my career, but here you're like, okay, it's your kids, right? There is a checklist that this person has to go through. He got to get it right. So yeah, and hopefully we got it right.
Wow. And I was actually going to ask you, how do you even critique, a nanny? I know knowing you from, the time we both worked together at Freshworks, I'm pretty sure you're the type of guy who maybe has some sort of, checklist on an Excel, and you might grade it in terms of different characters or sort of categories, right? What was the sort of the top 3 criteria in terms of making you lean towards a certain nanny?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And yeah, you're right. So my wife and I, we both sat down, and that was early on, right? Our son was 2 weeks old. And I remember we're driving in the car in Sydney, and I'm like, okay, so he's 2 weeks old. So what do we want him to be like? And you're fresh parents, and you're like, okay, let's and you're fresh parents, and it's your first kid. I think it changes completely when you have your second kid or your third kid. But with the first, you're like, okay, now we have to, everything. Let's figure it out. And back then, I'm raising this because back then we had a conversation around just values, right? What do you want to be, and what do we want to be as parents? What do we want to strive? And it's not a huge list, but there are 3-4 points to, you know, drive creativity and curiosity and drive just, you know, not being afraid of doing things, and not putting in boundaries from the very beginning. I think as parents and as grown-ups, we're so good at just, that's not possible. That's not how you do it. That's not an XYZ, right? Especially when, because that's not a boat that you're building there with Lego that
You know,
has
it
four
has to
wheels.
be,
That's
it has to be four-wheel. It has to have two sides. You know, like we sort of get
yeah,
preconditioned.
yeah.
Mm.
And we say we don't want to do it. Let's try to avoid it. Obviously, it doesn't work all the time. But these are kind of some of the values that we thought we're looking for in a nanny. And then obviously these things like, you know, just be an open-minded person, just be an active person instead of a reactive person. So be creative with the kid. And I know it changes. You know, if the kid is, if child is 7 months, you play differently than when it's 1.5. Play differently than when it's 3.
Mm.
But ultimately, these were some of the things we're looking for. And I kid you not, I probably had 40 throughout the last 3 years, 40 or 50 interviews. And after 20, you get in a groove. And you understand, you know, what is with language, with intonation, with the words they use and the way they answer some of the questions, that obviously only come with experience. And it's also that you only experience when you're a parent for some time. And so after a good amount of time, we think we've found one where it's a very friendly, smiling young lady who's been doing it for a lot of time, a long time, very creative, comes up with a lot of ideas, and you can feel, and I think that's the most important thing, right? There, you can have the interview conversation with that person via phone, but you only, you know, ultimately for us, it was our kids deciding whether it is the right person. So we would invite the nanny to our place for half an hour, an hour. And if they click right away, right? And it's like, daddy is still there. Oh, okay, good. Well, whatever. I have my new friend here. Then it's a good sign. And we had occasions where they didn't click, where it was just a very weird, you know, nanny tried and tried. And our son was just like, oh, not with you.
And you probably ask your son, so son, what was your criteria? And he probably goes, she smiled at me.
Yeah, yeah. It is sometimes this, yeah, smile, openness, just sometimes on just going down on the same eye level, right? And treating the child as a person, as an equal person. And how my son likes to call it one-on-one time, where he wants to, he likes one-on-one time. And if somebody can give him one-on-one time, then he will very much take it and enjoy it. And I think that was one of the reasons
I
why
remember,
so let's see.
Yeah, I remember a good trait is that when an adult is speaking with a child, the adult is obviously considerable height. The kid's pretty small, right? The best way to report, from what I read, is that the adult basically kneels down and goes eye to eye with the kid, therefore making it sort of equal. And that was probably one of the big sort of determinants of whether a nanny or a caregiver actually knew what they're talking about, just from what I read.
Yeah, no, it is, you know, exactly these little things to same eye level. And it's so amazing. Like I could talk hours about kids, but it's so amazing how you know, basic things like you know, answering silly questions with patience allows you to build a totally different relationship with kids, right? How often do we see parents, and it's us included, kid is, why dad? Why is that, daddy? And then the parent goes like, because blah, 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 I told you 1,000 times. Like, well, the kid is not asking, children are not asking because they want to be a nag, because they're honestly curious. And it's such a beautiful trait to have. And I think reacting to this in the patience, because it's not out of bad will that a children asking questions. It's because they really want to know and they really want to understand, and it's all new for them. And it's for us that it's all clear why the rain is falling down from the clouds. Well, if you haven't had that in physics in your 9th grade, you probably don't know. So teach your kids. Then you can build those really tight relationships. And I think it's a long-term investment, and patience, bringing the patience with and explaining things, and reminding yourselves that you've been a kid yourself once and probably asked exactly the same question, to just be with them and sometimes see the world in their eyes and from their perspective. And in order to see it from their perspective, sometimes you need to kneel down.
You do, eh? And you made a very interesting sort of response on the questionnaire. How do you allow your kids to continue to be kids? How do you sort of protect their innocence, so to speak, but also at the same time guide them to be responsible adults? And that really resonated with me, Alex. And if I were to take a bit of a pause, I was going to ask you during the start of this conversation, what occupies your mind right now? Is it kids or family? Sorry, kids or work, sorry. And needless to say, the kids are a very important part of your life, aren't they? Obviously. And that sort of occupies the most of your thoughts, doesn't it?
Well, it occupies a lot of the thoughts, right? Because, as you know, Girish, our Freshworks CEO, he always said, "Happy wife, happy life." And I think there's a chain of happiness that comes with a growing family: happy kids, happy wife, happy life. And I think there's nothing more frustrating than having a stressful situation at home because kids are in a funky state. And so, as I said earlier, we as parents, we love our work, and because of various reasons. And I think trying to integrate your career with kids, but still being there for the kids actively, and not kind of, one leg here, one leg there. I think that's something that needs a lot of attention, mindfulness, and training, and constant recalibration. And I don't know where it was, which podcast it was. It might be one of the Tim Ferriss podcasts where he interviewed somebody who was talking about family as well, and how he was the founder of a company and playing with his daughter, and then suddenly his daughter went out of the room, and they wanted to play together, and he says, then I realized, I picked up my phone and I started to look through emails, and basically my daughter went out and said, "Look, Daddy, you're not playing with me because you're constantly on your phone. I don't want to play with you." And that's for him when it triggered, well, we're so ingrained with, here's a display, let's quickly check something, or got a notification on my phone, on my watch. And it impacts kids because suddenly they start to feel that, they're not that important. And I think these are some pillars, coming back to values, that we discussed earlier, that I just feel kids are, again, it's a long-term investment, and not so much in a financial sense, but more, if you mess it up now, it will come back to you, because you can't, send them back to Amazon because you don't like the product anymore. They are around, and I think character will build around what they see at home at dinner tables and what they see at home when you interact as a family. So yeah, it is a big chunk of my attention because I think I want them to be good, resilient human beings, and that starts with us as parents.
Mm. We know it's a lot of responsibility. You and I know that there's no such thing as perfect parenting. Do you see it? Is there some pressure on you and Alex to be a perfect dad, a perfect husband, a perfect employee?
Interesting. I think that pressure keeps reducing with time as you understand maybe your own value boundaries and understand that sometimes you just have to let it be. And I think, if you asked me, 10 years ago, there was a lot of pressure, building up a career that that also kind of showed to others that you achieved something. And I think throughout the time that drops a significant part. You're like, well, I'm doing things that I like. Everything else will come with it. And I think that's for the other parts, like being a parent. Again, I think the first 5-6 months, maybe the first year, I think that relates to every parent, almost parents. First year with your first child, you're like, we can't do this, we can't do that. And then it comes, second child comes around and you're like, yeah, whatever, you will grow up, you will do it. We're not that stressed anymore about you doing XYZ, eating sand, I don't know, lying in dirt, looking like a little piggy, because you will survive and it will help you. And same with being a husband, to be honest. I think I have an amazing wife who's, the things that we went through the last couple of years, and we always have big projects that, because we met in Africa, we moved back to Berlin, we bought a house, next year we got married, next year we had a kid, and there's always something happening. But it's fun. We always smile at each other and say, well, that milestone is achieved. What's next? And as long as it's fun, as long as it has always stress. Like let's face it, being a family is sometimes stressful. But we had the conversation earlier. Sometimes it's just good to sit down together and talk it out without being grumpy all the time, and then suddenly you realize, okay, it's not as bad as we thought. So let's smile over it and continue, and that reduces the pressure.
It does, eh? Sometimes it's great to have these conversations with you and I, and a lot of feedback I get sometimes just on this podcast. It's just nice to just sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Or just listen to other people talk and get other ideas and so how is it for you for being a dad with 2 kids and driving the conversations with everyday people? What is your learning? Where is your pressure?
It's a good question. And I'm very thankful that in the past I've gone through a lot of health scares. They literally took me over to the edge. I'm very thankful that I've come back time and time again, and that has given me a lot of perspective. This is a conversation that you and I could have for the next podcast, or maybe you can interview me or have a conversation with me one day. And I'm very thankful that 12 years ago I went through a very scary health journey. And it's been a huge blessing in disguise. And what I've taken away from it all is that as I get older and I kick on in the years, apparently I'm losing my baby face. The kids are stealing my youthful looks. the more as I kick on in the years, Alex, the less I take things too seriously. So whether it be a failure, whether it be something wrong in the career, or whether it be wrong personally, whether I can't do something in the exercise, whether there's an issue with one of the investments, like it goes on and on and on, right? There's always something that goes up, right? The more and more I take it less seriously. And if you ask me anything, I feel pretty good at the moment. I feel happy. And I spoke to a friend this morning and we talked about the differences between being successful and being happy, right? And I think, being successful, I think there's a person by the name of Naval, I believe. I believe he's the founder of AngelList. And he made a very good point. He goes, success is basically about making the right decisions. Happiness is not giving a beep about the outcome.
Yep.
And that pretty much encapsulates how I sort of, approach life, how I approach kids, how I spend time with my wife, how I talk to you. I'm always going to be that cheerful guy. And I'm just very thankful now that I am being myself. And that's not to say that there's no pressures. There always will be, right? But I very much am just going to let it be.
Yep. That's an interesting point, right? The outcomes don't matter so much. I mean, they do matter.
They do matter. Fundamentally, they do.
I think, right? But I think on top of that, it's what do you do with the outcomes? And that's in various aspects of life. Let it be investments, let it be how you have a conversation with somebody. And what pops to my mind there is my niece. She just graduated, and now she's like, "Hey, what will I do now?" And the parents are like, "Well, you have to go and study, and you have to, move forward. And why don't you have a plan? You should have a plan. Like you should have had it 5 years ago, approximately." And I'm like, "Well, the most important thing is that you don't sit around. Just sitting around is probably the worst thing that you can do, because then you don't have outcomes. And an outcome might be to learn that X is not the right thing for you, but maybe Z. Outcome might be that you discover interests that you never had. An outcome might be that you start doing something and suddenly you realize it is your passion. You want to continue that. Just don't sit at home. And I think this is where the relation of driving for outcome, but don't stress if it's not the outcome you expected, is probably the helpful.
Yeah. Let's be honest. We're not going to get every single decision correct.
No.
You know what I mean? Like we may try to control the outcome, and there's always going to be a bit of lady luck sitting on the sidelines. But that quote really hit me, Alex. And the last thing I want to do is outsource my happiness to something external. Because when you do that, you're always on the end of the ball of the string. And I don't want that feeling. And kids are great. My daughter, we have a custom in Chinese where, we celebrate 100 days. So my daughter is now 105 days. We should have done it last week, but my wife had COVID.
Congratulations. Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean? And my wife was like, "You know what? We got to do it. We got to." I said, "Babe, it's good. You've got COVID. We've got to hunker down. You've got to isolate, right? So let's just push it out to another week."
Yeah. Sometimes it's just let's do it a little bit later.
Yeah.
But tell me one thing, and I know because you just mentioned it, how the materialism, and like how do you detach from materialism in Western cultures to avoid that, getting the next big thing, the next iPhone, the next car, the next whatever, is impacting your happiness? I
Sorry,
think
what
I'm
was the
asking
question?
this
Sorry, Alex.
especially, how do you avoid that trap? How do you work around not moving towards being happy through materialism? How do you teach kids? How do you make that as a value in your family, and even at work, right? The next promotion might probably not make you happier, maybe for a short time, but not like, it will last a couple of weeks and then you're doing the same thing again.
I think what I'll tell my son and daughter is that aim for that promotion, aim for that Ferrari, aim for the iPhone 32, aim for the latest whiz bang gizmo. Do it, do it, do it again. Keep buying, do whatever you want, and let's have a chat afterwards. And by all means, their personality might dictate the fact that they just love this stuff, and that keeps them going. So be it. You know, one of my kids might go, you know what? After buying that fifth Porsche, Dad, I think they're all the same. I'm not going to do that. I think if I then were to decouple that specific question, Alex, and parlay it into something a bit more sort of holistic. Now, personally, for me, I'm very thankful that I've experienced those things in the past. And to me, I don't see value in it. But that doesn't say that someone who does it is just stupid, because that's not my journey. That's each to their own. But getting back to your question about how do we teach people the inadequacies, so to speak, of materialism and always wanting more, right? I would recommend that person to really go down that path and to be materialistic, to be arrogant, to just go down a certain path. And hopefully there are lessons along the way, and to be open, and he or she might pick up what that lesson may be. That's the only thing I'll really say to that. Because
yeah. And I think the kookaburra in the back applauded to that statement.
That's right.
By the way,
I live in a very bushy area.
Kookaburras are my favorite birds, because as you know, my wife is Australian. We spent a year and a bit during the last couple of years in Australia, and it's just I love it. Same with the song Kookaburras. It's in the old country, which is the favorite song.
I actually have a swimming
pool. That's
a
whole different topic.
I actually have a swimming pool, Alex.
There you go.
And it is dirty as. It's probably like a dark green. You probably know where I'm leaning towards, right?
Very good.
Because my concern is that if I clean it, I have to constantly maintain it, right? So getting back to kookaburras, I believe that they actually help me clean the surface of the water. Because obviously over time, right, when you don't clean the pool, there's a lot of stuff growing on the surface, right? And I can always see them in the morning just picking stuff up the surface, right? So I'm a fan because they're helping me clean the pool somehow.
Good.
And so what's your answer to that question? If I were to sort of flip it back on you, what would you do?
Yeah, I think, it's you have to experience it. I think that's the only way how we learn. It's so interesting. Sometimes my son says, "Daddy, I had to learn it myself." Where I'm telling after he bumped his head somewhere, or he did something and it completely failed, right? It failed to the point that he is in tears. And initially I found myself answering, "Well, buddy, we talked about this, I told you." And then he tells me, "Daddy, I had to learn it myself." And that is, for me, was yet another thing where, like, okay, Daddy, just shut up. Don't say things.
Shut up, Dad.
I just don't say things like that. They have to learn themselves, and it's with a lot of things, right? And if it, as you said, if it makes them happy, it makes them happy, and then let it be part of their life. And then I think it's, the people around who can still give some guidance and show that materialism can be interesting, can be fulfilling, but try out this as well, because there are other things that might be equally interesting, and that's the way to go. Is it hard? Yes, I think it is, especially in the world we live. But that's the way it is. Life isn't easy.
No. And, obviously a second child now. What have you learned about yourself?
That the second child can be as cute as the first one. That you experience helps you to remove the pressure.
It does,
right? Coming back to the topic that we had earlier, that there are certain things you don't forget. You don't forget how to change nappies. You don't forget how to feed a baby. Once you've done it once, you can do it twice.
You and I can do it blindfolded now. We can do it blindfolded.
Yeah. And that for me, family, and especially being 4, it's just you come home and there are people who smile at you and want you home. Is probably one of the most amazing things. And there's and it's probably also, so my mom is Russian, and her family was always very, very close. So was the family on my dad's side, who's German. And I think that family understanding and understand what you have with the family, that where you can just rely on each other, and where it's just good to be there and spend time together, is it's just super helpful. And that's something that we try to drive at home. So there's almost no TV time, there's no display time. Although my son asked me the other day, Daddy, when you come back from your work trip, can you bring me a real iPad? I'm like, okay. He's 3, but and so yeah, I think obviously it is a different. The second kid adds an additional layer, and especially because they're pretty close, 2 years, 2 and a bit years. The bigger one still needs a lot of attention. It's not that you can plonk him with friends and then he's out.
Out and you can't just sit him on a chair and go, hey, read the book.
Exactly. But it needs a lot of engagement and integration of everything together. But that's also something that you learn, and that is something where you can build relationships between the siblings, and I think that ultimately, again, long term, will just be super nice. And obviously, as my brother said, 4 is always good, because then the car is full and you still have a place to, take somebody with you. I'm like, okay, that is the first reaction when I tell you that we're expecting a new kid, that 4 is nice because your car is full.
Very practical.
But that's a different, that's practical. That's being.
But I'm not too sure whether someone can fit into the middle seat if you've got 2 baby seats on the sides.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But for him, the car was full.
Okay, so it's okay if you're going to tell. Are you going to tell me you're going to get like a 7-seater or a 7-seater multi-van? Then go for it.
Yeah. But no, we're done with 4 cars.
So essentially, Alex, baby number 2, there's less pressure on it. You guys sort of know what you're doing, and it's taken it off. You've got a nanny now who's brought in that time where, like you said, your wife and yourself can really focus 6-7 hours on work, for example, right? Do you see a lot of sort of similarities between obviously leading a large team and motivation, coaching, and leading it, and to sort of how you approach the kids? Do you see a lot of sort of parallels between the both?
Yes, to a certain extent, yes. It's an interesting question, right? So, I mean, obviously, at work, as you know, I do have teams in in various parts of the world, and we work a lot with external parties as well, and we with a lot of young people within the company, because the company has been growing phenomenally, and so there obviously we hired a lot of good people, of good young people, and so if then I worked in Africa as well for a couple of years. So I lived in Nairobi, also with young people there. And I invest in companies as well, in startups. And so we work with the founders as well as the an investment team. And I think it often you see parallels on how you can approach and coach around a certain problem statement, right? There is one way to say, this is how you do it, and please do it, right? If you have an issue. It's another way to, be more on the Socrates side of things and ask the right questions for people to get the answer themselves. And I think that's kind of, I'm trying to work more on, I don't want to tell them the way, I want to guide them into the way so they can get to a solution, be the best one, but to a solution themselves, and then execute. And we sit together again and say, okay, was that good? Here are some other ideas, and how would you review the outcome together, and then the next time let's have a tactic to address these problems. And I mean, that is something, obviously, a conversation that you can have with your colleagues, that you can have with your team, that you can have with founders. Obviously, conversation will be a little bit different with your kids, but ultimately that's my guiding principle, right? And it's very easy to say top down, well, this is how life is, and this is how you have to do it, instead of going, well, you try it out. And I'm here to help. And I think this is probably the only parallel that I see driving through everything.
So it's sort of
or
very
the most
much
prominent one.
So sort of the whole sort of analogy is that if you teach a person how to fish, you basically help them for life, essentially.
Yep.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's very true, isn't it?
It is, right? And I think the moment you understand and you get into habit of addressing problem statements in a certain way, you reduce the fear of, you kind of flip a switch, because you reduce the fear of unknowns, and you allow for them to develop methods and ways to deal with unknown issues, because they don't have to rely on a specific way to solve it, right? Because then look at math. At math, we learn certain rules, and based on those rules, you can execute your formula. But life isn't math, right? Sometimes it throws curveballs, and there are complete things that you haven't foreseen. And if you only work based out of known tactics, then you're toast. Because it will stress you out, right? And stress ultimately, if ends up in worst case not making any decision, and
it can manifest itself in many ways. Stress.
Yeah. All right, and then you procrastination and burnouts are everywhere. Everywhere you go, you read the words in one way or the other. But I think it's also a result of society in general not teaching how to problem solve, but teaching just ways of how to be in a very structured manner, and that just doesn't allow for dealing with unknowns.
Sort of critical thinking. Fortunately, unfortunately, it's critical thinking. It's I think during schools, critical thinking is not something that you can really sort of quantifiably measure. It is very much analyzing a situation. And when you analyze a situation, like you pointed out, the permutations and combinations in terms of what could happen and what will happen are somewhat infinite. And when you have infinite possibilities, how do you actually grade that? That's a topic altogether, isn't it? In terms of, arming the future generation, whether it be younger employees, whether it be ourselves, to critically think.
Yeah, but here's another tool that we use on a regular basis, even with our kids. What's the worst thing that can happen? Right? That question alone. What's the worst thing that can happen? And that can be, kid jumps on the couch like a wallaby. And what can happen if you jump on the edge? He stops, he thinks, comes up with certain things. Do you have a solution for that if something like this happens? And then sometimes he props a pillar on the floor. If I fall down, then I can fall on the pillar, Daddy.
Very smart.
Pillow Daddy, right? There you go. And it's the same at work, right? Okay, good. We want to make a decision. What's the worst thing that can happen? Like what? And sometimes you understand that the worst thing is actually not as bad. So you can go for it and you can try it out, because if that is the worst thing that can happen, well, that doesn't hurt. You won't get fired. We won't shut down the company because we had made a wrong decision. And let's think about
knock
how
yourself
we
out.
Can. Yeah, exactly. Knock yourself out, because you will be able to get up again. And that for me has always been a very, very comfortable way to go through life. And that was the question when I got the job offer in Africa. And I was like, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? I come back to Berlin and find something else. If I don't succeed there, if I don't like it,
whatever, you're gonna just come back.
Yeah, you'd come back. Maybe do something else there. That's the worst thing. Okay, let's do it.
You know what's funny? The fact that you can go back home reduces the sort of I'm just thinking in a very different angle here, right? The fact that you can go home gives you a way out. And when you have a way out, do you believe that you would fight less in a way? Because put it this way, right? Say, for example, Alex, you had no choice. You had to succeed in Africa. That's a different level of thinking as opposed to, what, if it doesn't work, I can always go back home, doesn't it?
Fair enough. That's true, right? And but if you can say, okay, good, what's the worst thing that can happen? And it allows you to make that jump. I'd rather prefer this than saying, well, I have to succeed. If I do this, I have to succeed. And very few people, I think, have the drive to then take the plunge and say, I have to succeed. I will still do it. Because a lot of people will say, oh, that's too much of a risk. I'll stay in my comfort zone. And I think I'd rather have somebody try it out and then still be able to, do a step back, change, right? And it's not that you go back into your comfort zone, right? Sometimes if you do make a certain decision, you're already so far out that even going back means you're still out of your comfort zone, because you might have to find a new job, a new apartment. Maybe you're not moving back home because, whatever it is, but you made a decision and you made an experience. And I think that is more important than having that pressure of I have to succeed. But it's fair enough. Ultimately, there are decisions in life where you just can't go back, like having kids, right? No. And then you have to deal with it.
It's a funny question. My friend goes to me, how's parenting? And I go to him, it's easy because you got no choice.
Yeah. That's true.
You can't back out, right? So you got to enjoy it, right?
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you got to enjoy it. And it's very enjoyable, right? At the end of the day. But I think it's enjoyable because you constantly get something very positive back. And I think there are other areas where that might not be the case. I think that is something where our brains are just triggered to smiles and hugs and funny things that our kids do to continue doing what we do as a parent.
Oh yeah,
If
it's
you
all stacked
are,
against us. They make us love them.
yeah, yeah, that's true. It's not always the case with colleagues and bosses, right? But that's a different topic.
Oh, that's a different chestnut altogether there, Alex. So we've got the nanny. You know, she's giving you 6, 7 hours a day with your wife. You're focusing on work. You're coming back. You're spending quality time with the kids. Have you got the definition of balance?
I think there's always the balance is always more or less there, because we really try to, if we're with kids, we're with kids, right? The products of today and the software allows you to, I have a block from 6 to 8:30 when the kids are in bed. It's in my calendar. Everything turns down, no notifications apart from 3 people. That is my mom, that is my wife, and that is my brother. And everything else will wait. And that's dinner time, that's preparing dinner, that's eating together, that's having that quality time before bed. And it's the same in weekend. Weekend, everything turns off, right?
So 6 to
and
8 p.m.
That's my
every
way
day.
of, yeah. So basically it's from 6 to 9 p.m. every day. And so there is nothing that goes through. Sometimes, obviously, you're like, okay, good, I'll do 30 minutes more right now in order to then not do it on the weekend. But it's very rare, and it's that is for me a holy grail. And I'll tell everyone, my boss's boss, please, let's not do it that time because it's my family time. We can do it afterwards when they're asleep, when then it's a little bit more on my side. And then again, I think
you really guard
the
that
rest
time.
Yeah. And I'll take it. Earlier, probably if you had asked me 5 years ago, it wasn't there. It was kind of always on because I also enjoyed being always on. I was somehow, in all the madness that we have around, the feeling of being important still helps you to, do a little bit more and more, until you realize that maybe that's not the most important thing. And I think, again, for me, that's the block with family. That's not going anywhere. That's my work knows about it, and I'm very religious about it. And there again, it's the same with the weekend, right? From Friday midnight to Monday 8 o'clock in the morning, exactly the same. Nothing goes through, and so I can spend time with family. And then balance. I think the rest is you need your own time. It's the question is, what do you enjoy, right? And I, as I said, we do work with startups and founders. That's for me one way to just get various perspectives on problems, especially as they're mostly focused on businesses and markets in Africa. So there goes a lot of time, and the rest is reading. I don't watch TV that much, to be honest, and then there's that balance. Again, sometimes it's not there as much, right? Sometimes there's still more work because there's more time with family
as is.
in the but at the end of the day, there's we can say that we are getting to a point where we are happy, and we can say there's focus time for both sides. It's good.
So essentially, 6 to 9, Friday midnight to Monday morning is family time, right? And does that family time include Alex time?
It does.
It
No,
does.
it does, right? It's family time. Obviously, it's not always with the kids. Obviously, you have to do your shopping and whatnot, right, on the weekends. You know how it is. But we really try to during the weekend just be with the kids and have that quality time, and also quality time for ourselves. Go for a run, read a book, especially in the evenings when everything is a little bit quieter. Spend time with my wife as much as possible during when kids are not there and asleep. So that includes it as well. Yeah.
So if you had a day where the kids are driving you mad, so this is in the morning, they're driving you crazy, right? Your wife plonks you with some ridiculous task that you need to get done at the end of the day. The day ahead, you've got packed, you've got meetings left, right, and center. The day goes by, things don't work out, tasks get pulled back, balls get dropped, your team aren't doing what they're supposed to do. You have sort of fights, so to speak, with your partners overseas. How would you de-stress after that day?
I would, well, yeah, first, I'm on a regular basis, I'm coming back to prioritizing things with the question, okay, what is the worst thing that can happen here, and what's the worst thing that can happen there, right? And there, it's for me, family, then work. Right? Sometimes, obviously, you will. It can't always be that you say, okay, I'm gonna have a problem at work, but I'll just play with my kids right now. You still need to move forward.
You're gonna deal
but
with
if
it.
but if it hits the fan, then I will always say, okay, good, and let me fix the problem for family problem first, make them all happy, because if they're happy, occupied, and in a less stressful mood, then it will automatically give me time to focus more time and mental space. I would probably go for a run. Sometimes, in all honesty, it's a glass of wine and a little bit of chocolate, 10 minutes somewhere on the balcony with music in my ears, go for a quick walk, come back, and then do it. But interestingly, getting there and just telling, hey, let's now just take 15 minutes out to calm down. That takes some energy. Sometimes you're so run up in the wheel that stepping out of it is harder than continuing, but the outcome is probably X times better. So
to
I
step
think we
out
all
of the
have to learn
situation.
to step out of the situation, to step out of that wheel of, okay, everything is flying around, and you're like, oh, I can't leave them alone for 15 minutes. Well, yeah, you can. There's always a moment where you can just, I'll be back. I'll be back.
I'll be
I'll
back.
be
It
back
does
in a
have to be
different
done
mood,
now.
and then we'll
By all
fix it.
means, there are times where things are that urgent, but yeah, I'll be back.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's mix it up, Alex. Let's take off your hat as a dad. Let's take off your hat at Freshworks. Let's take off your hat as a runner, as a wine lover, as a chocolate lover. What is your ideal date scenario with your wife?
So we okay.
It could be a time when
I
it was
have
before
another
kid.
idea.
Yeah, tell me. This is mix it up here. Yeah.
The for us, travel has always been key, and we have been to a bajillion places. And the best time that we have had is just the two of us to go to a place over the weekend, or maybe 4 or 5 days, right? Extended date. It is what it is. We have the time. And then just travel around and go to places, be a little bit on the move. We're not people who like to sit at the beach for 7 hours and read a book. It's just to see places, move, and enjoy amazing food. And so I think we would go to a place we've never been, get into nice accommodation, whatever it might be, and then find restaurants and dessert places, and I love coffee places that we would go to, and in between we sightsee.
Give me a place. Give me a place, Alex. Where is that next date? Where is that next 5-day date going to be?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think the next one will probably be Paris, because we wanted to do it for our anniversary, and then I got COVID and everything else. Right.
It just goes downhill.
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah. So probably there. Because we've both of us have been, but we have not been together. And we're like, that's gonna be fun. Let's we will learn something new, because we will see the city in a different from a different perspective, and maybe we'll learn something new about ourselves. So that could be one place. And we always wanted to go back to Namibia. We've been there once for 5 days, and it was just so relaxing, because the moment you get out of the capital, there's no radio, there are hardly any people around. It's just desert, ocean on the western side of Namibia, and just quiet and peacefulness that you can enjoy together. Obviously, there are no restaurants, no good coffee places, but that takes a backseat if you can just drive around and just look out and walk on the dunes and stuff like that. And that quality time together to experience things together. And really experience. It's not watching a movie, right? It's really experience something with everything, with your eyes, with your hands, tasting, with your ears. Yeah.
Experiencing things.
That is, yeah. I think that is where we would usually head towards.
It's lovely, isn't it? And did you know that we've been speaking for over an hour now, Alex?
No, the only thing I figured that my coffee is empty, but it was always already halfway through when we started.
I've got honey water, and as a side point, one of my very good friends actually kept his own sort of what do you call that, sort of beehive thing.
Yeah.
Like the best tasting honey I've ever tasted in my life.
Amazing.
I literally put a teaspoon into the jar and just go. One of the downsides of doing this is that I need to keep track of time. You guys, my guests, can just immerse themselves in a conversation, in which I'm very thankful for.
Yeah.
I love sort of asking a bit of an oddball question as we sort of come to the end, right? Like, I know you got to come back for podcast 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? Let's fast forward 30 years from now. Okay, 30 years from now, if there's one single piece of advice that you want your kids to remember, what is it?
This is a hard question. And I'll just go through what's popping into my mind right now, right? So, I mean, obviously you have, things like don't take yourself too serious, try things out, don't be idle, right? Money is not everything, but make enough money so you don't have to worry about it. I think that is something that we always like, you don't have to be, that capitalist. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, right? You need money, and it's such a big burden to think about it in a way of, where do I get my next $50 in order to buy me a pizza? And it's so unfortunate we live in a world where this is actually still a problem. But then, I mean, look at climate change. it's undeniably there, right? How will it look like in 30 years? I wish I knew, right? And I think there is, political unrest, unfortunately. And that impacts the prioritization of suggestions you can give to your kids. Maybe it will be wear sunscreen every day. Maybe it will be to make sure you have a house on the moon or on Saturn or Mars or wherever it will be. So I think it's hard. And I think it's probably allowing to be flexible and not think too much about these are my 5 tactics in life and that's how I work everything around, but be able to deal with the unknowns, whatever it might be. Maybe that's what it is, right? Allow yourself to be able to deal with unknowns. Don't be afraid of them. Things will change. You have to change your attitude, your way of thinking sometimes, and that's okay. You can be afraid of things, but make certain decisions. Don't be afraid of making decisions, even if you don't know the outcome. There you go.
Brilliant. You do know, obviously, that as you know, I'm going to be posting this up. So this will last for 30 years.
Very good. I'll tell my son, and in 30 years he can listen to it and tell me if these suggestions hold true. It will be interesting. It will be interesting. 30 years is such a long time. We'll see.
Fantastic. Alex, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the Medium podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. Enjoy your honey tea, and maybe we'll see each other on the next episode, sometime within the next 30 years.